All right, how to not suck at drums. Part 1, single strokes. Right, left, right, left, right, left. Single strokes, I believe, are the most important foundation for any drummer. You're not going to be a great drummer if you don't have good control over your single strokes, especially a good single stroke roll. Why? Well, we got two hands, right and left. It's pretty natural for people on day one to go back and forth from right to left. Pretty easy to understand, pretty easy to do, but people want to develop a fast, buttery single stroke roll. Everyone wants to be able to go across the drum set and play fast singles and just move it around the drum. It's easy if you don't have the proper technique to get tense, right? To tighten up, to squeeze the sticks too much, to use too much arm. So how do we develop a good single stroke roll? Well, let's talk about it. Cool. So for a very slow single stroke roll, we can kind of use more arm. But as the roll gets faster, the technique has to change a little bit. So the muscle group that's being used needs to be smaller, right? I wouldn't try and play a fast single stroke roll from my elbow or shoulder, right? I mean, it would look very amateur, and it would sound pretty bad, and it would feel bad for sure. For most things that are kind of like a medium to medium fast speed, we can focus on the wrist, okay? So the wrist is going to allow us to turn faster, maintaining good control over the stick, right? We're not letting go of the stick too much, but we're not using our entire arm. Okay, so a good exercise to practice just using that wrist motion. I take the part of my hand where my palm meets my wrist. Place that flat on the snare drum head or the pad. Don't let that part leave the snare drum, right? You're just going to practice knocking on the door, right? If this part right here, if this part leaves the snare drum at all, it probably means your arm is taking over a little bit. Get both hands on the snare and see how fast you can go with just that wrist. Once you get very used to that feeling, pick up the sticks and try the same thing. So far, I'm not using a whole lot of arm or finger, right? You'll notice my fingers are kind of staying in the same position. My fingers are not getting super involved yet. One exercise I like to do to isolate each hand. First, I kind of do one hand at a time. So I'll do 16 on a hand or 2 bars of eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and switch and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and repeat over and over. Use a metronome. This exercise allows you to listen to each hand individually and make sure you're developing a lot of consistency with the sound. You want the same touch, the same articulation, the same tone out of the drum with each hit. You don't want to have a lot of variance. Consistency is key. The technique, everything about this is going to be really important, okay? So start with 16 on a hand. Just the wrist. Do it at all different dynamics, really loud. Get a good stretch. Or try it at a very soft dynamic for more control. You got to do it all different speeds, all different dynamics, or else you have not even come close to mastering this, okay? So that's step 1. After that, I like to do an exercise where I change the type of rhythm that I'm playing. So I'm going to get a metronome going here. I got a metronome going. I'm going to do 2 measures of each rhythm. Quarter notes, then eighth notes, then eighth note triplets, then 16th notes, and then 16th note triplets. Why not? Okay, we'll start with that. I'm still going to focus on the wrist and staying very relaxed. I'm not squeezing, but I'm not opening too much. All right. So the 16th note triplets at the end, those started to get a little bit fast for me. Now, my wrists, they can go that fast, right? I've spent years working on this so that my wrist can turn that fast. But if I were to go any faster, if I were to do 32nd notes, for example, ooh, that's a little bit too fast for my wrists to turn, right? So at a certain speed, and it might be a little different for everyone, but the fingers are going to have to start taking over. Like I just said, at a certain speed, the fingers are going to have to start taking over and either helping the wrist or just completely taking over, depending on the dynamic and the speed. At a certain speed, you're going to see my fingers start to come into play more. Ready? It's all wrist. Now it's a little bit of wrist and finger. And then eventually it's mostly finger. You see the wrists start to stop moving like that. Right? So, how do we work on the fingers? Well, it's hard to work on the fingers really slow, but I suggest you start there. Try and just play some slow notes with only the fingers moving the stick and not the wrist or the arm. All right, and just gradually speed that up. Now, you don't want to close your fingers too much, right? If you close all the way, the stick's not going to be able to bounce. So it's like I'm just flicking the stick down. And then I'm leaving my hand open so that the stick can bounce. So I'm trying to only do the work on the way down to the drum. And I'm not like lifting the stick back up with the fingers. I'm just flicking it down. Okay. So you do the same exercises, just focusing on the fingers. You can isolate one finger at a time. But I find that not as useful as just practicing using all of them together. Now, the first three fingers are probably going to do the most work. The pinky will help a little bit, especially for control, but the first three fingers are the ones doing the most work. Do the same exercises that I showed you already with the fingers and spend a lot of time in a zone where the roll is kind of almost too fast, but not quite too fast, right? If you just start going like full throttle all the way and you can't maintain that for like 60 seconds, and it just sounds messy, you got to back it off, okay? Find a zone where it's like slightly uncomfortable, but you can maintain it with good quality for, let's say, 60 seconds. So for me, that's about here. So I would throw on a metronome, play some 16ths or 16th note triplet, whatever rhythm makes sense to you, whatever's easy to feel, right? And just work on moving those fingers. Now, eventually, if I'm playing something really loud and powerful and fast, I'll use my wrist and my fingers together. Okay, my hand does have to be fairly open for that. If my hand is more closed, it's all wrist. It's not bouncing as much, and I can't snap with the fingers. All right, so to wrap up this video, the next step after you've mastered the single strokes on one surface with the wrists, with the fingers, right? The next step is to practice moving it around the drum set, right? So So practice groups of 2s. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Start slow. Make sure you're not forcing any unnecessary tension. Also, something to consider. Now, if you're moving around, your arms have to kind of move your hands to the next drum, right? But that does not mean that the arm is taking over the stroke motion. It's not going vertical up and down. The arm is just moving in a horizontal plane, right? I'm still focusing on the wrist and the fingers if I'm going fast, right? So my arm is moving outwards, but it's not going up and down, okay? So that's a very important thing. Don't add unnecessary arm movements once you go to the toms or something. So groups of 3 are another fun one. All right, just doing 3 single strokes per drum. It's nice going from the floor tom to the snare. Yeah, groups of 4, whatever you can think of, okay? Even like crossing over is a good skill to work on. You gotta start slow. Technique and sound, clarity of sound is always the number one thing. Okay, if you're moving around and it starts to feel tense and looks tense and sounds bad, then slow it down. What are you doing? Okay, don't do that shit. All right, well, that is part 1 of this single stroke video. I might make a part 2. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or things you would like me to add upon this lesson. And we'll see you next time.